Michael.
Roland, I'm glad. Two quick points I want to make. I'm glad you brought up pension funds because I remember back a few years ago when you hosted the State of Black America. One of the things Reverend Al Sharpton talked about is how money managers will take pension fund dollars, our pension fund dollars, and loan it to business developers. The business developers would then come into our communities and gentrify us out of our own communities with our pension fund dollars. But also, we can also choose different areas and investments that our pension fund dollars are invested into as well. A lot of us don't know that we can do that. Secondly, the person that spoke before, Ariane Simone, she talked about $5 trillion and how closing loopholes and gaps in policies, the U.S. economy can grow by $5 trillion. That was a study by Citigroup Bank a few years ago that talked about how the U.S. economy had lost $16 trillion over a 20-year period of time because of racism. And they specifically stated that about $13 trillion in business revenue never flowed into the U.S. economy because African-American entrepreneurs could not access bank loans. They talked about how black workers have lost $113 billion in potential wages over the past 2 decades because they could not get a college degree. Black people could not get a college degree. And lastly, they talked about how the housing market lost $218 billion in sales because black applicants could not get home loans. Well, Vice President Kamala Harris, when we look at policy, $50,000 tax cut for new businesses, that's something that we can take advantage of. And then also when she talks about 3 million new homes being built in her first 4 years in office, that also addresses housing and a generational wealth, having an asset to pass on to future generations as well for African Americans. So all of this is connected to policy, which is connected to who the hell you vote for. Once again, if you're black and you're thinking about voting for Donald Trump, you need to have your head examined. You don't even understand that you don't understand.
Well, folks, there's been a settlement in the case of the Fearless Fund, a venture capitalist firm out of Atlanta that provided grants to black women and other women of color. They were sued by Ed Blum and his group, saying that this fund discriminated against non-black women. The lawsuit, of course, from the American Alliance for Equal Rights claimed that the Fearless Strivers Grant Contest, which was open only to black females, was discriminatory. Now, according to an online post by Fearless Fund founder Ariane Simone, the grant program was at its end when the court case began in 2023. The fund said that it was motivated to avoid a court ruling to not lead to a Supreme Court decision that could end nationwide minority-based funding. The Fearless Fund said it will continue to focus on helping under-resourced entrepreneurs who have been ill-served by traditional capital markets for far too long. In a statement on the settlement, it announced a new $200 million debt fund to lend to more than 3,000 under-resourced founders. Matt, that particular point there is important because a lot of people don't understand when you're making decisions how you want to proceed. Thurgood Marshall was brilliant with this with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where they were very careful about certain cases because they did not want a precedent to be established with the Supreme Court. They wanted the right cases. And so what they said here is that, hey, we know this very far right-wing Supreme Court. If we keep fighting this and it goes all the way to them, they could totally rule against us and shut down all such programs nationwide.
Yeah, you know, I'm waking up in a cold sweat like 3 times a week because I'm going to argue at the Fifth Circuit for the first time next month. And I have a pretty novel issue in one of my cases, and that's exactly my fear. I don't want to make bad law. I think the facts are on my side in my case, so God willing, that won't be an issue. But that is something a lawyer has to consider. You have to consider, look, if I take this up higher in the Fifth Circuit or the 11th Circuit here, or the United States Supreme Court comes down with a rule against me, then that disadvantages all other people who may either be claimants or may be defending cases similar to mine. So that is a part of the calculus. I do also think, though, you know, wrongs have to be righted, and that is a necessary risk. It's something I grappled with in my own case, but I think it's meritorious. I think it's righteous, and my client was, you know, good to go forward, and we are going forward. But that is absolutely a practical consideration of appellate law, particularly when you are in courts that have shown historically they are not going to be, you know, amenable to a position like this, which is one where you're trying to deal with anything that's marginalized people or discriminatory laws. And what I think is really strange about this is You know, my first question with this was standing, is how Edward Bloom even has standing to bring all these cases. I know he's done it through anonymous business owners. But the thing is, the state sometimes does these very things. I was having a conversation earlier this week where I learned that in the state of Texas, the CPS system, to incentivize non-white children being adopted, considering they're not adopted at the same levels, they give a subsidy if a child is adopted at a younger age who is not white than they do if it's a white child being adopted, because apparently most of the people who want to adopt white children. So to incentivize adopting non-white children, there's a subsidy that you are eligible for earlier. The reason that's important in this context is because this is an example of a reality that requires some kind of remedial action. And here it's, you know, minority business owners who are not having the same access to capital historically. We as a society have to figure out how to reconcile that with things like the Civil Rights Act that are supposed to prevent discrimination in certain contexts. But when you have a reality that, you know, there's such an inequity that there needs to be somebody remedying that, in a situation like this, there needs to be a policy response that we have not found how to, promulgate yet. Because until that happens, you're going to continue to have that disparity. And obviously, some people want that disparity. But if you want to actually give people a leg up, you have to allow organizations like the Fearless Fund to do the great work that they're doing in giving grants to minority female business owners.
Aaron Simone was at the CBCF this week. On yesterday, they had a panel dealing with the whole issue of wealth creation in the country. This is what she said on her panel.
Grow this economy by $5 trillion over a 5-year period. If we get rid of discrimination, why? Because it distorts the market and it causes it to underperform. So it's in our economic interest, but to Michael's point earlier, we've got to have an economic and moral conversation. It's time for us to receive the dignity of our government's policies, because that's what has been extended to white Americans.
Go on. Arian, and she mentioned something. She talked about changing the rules. How do we do that? And why? Is it because of the economic opportunities that people are so afraid of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion? Would that help us economically? And how do we get people to not be so fearful of it and change the rules when it comes to this?
Oh, Lord. I feel like we've had 3 keynotes, so I'm trying to figure out how to sum this up before I get into this. Thank you so much for having me. I want to touch on something right before I answer your question, if you don't mind. When you started the conversation, you were talking about the wealth gap.
Yeah.
And Attorney David elaborated on the 8 to the 12. I want to shed light on why we're having a catalytic effect right now when it comes to the wealth gap. It's called the technology industry. It's the world's largest wealth-producing industry, and it is funded by venture capitalists. The venture capital and private equity industry is a $62 trillion industry. And the largest investors are pension funds. Pension funds are made up of teachers, firefighters, police officers, and many more. Many careers that have people of color at the backbone of those industries. Sounds similar to something before 1865 when I'm about to break this down. So you have the pension funds right here. And then the money goes up to the VC industry, that's $62 trillion. That's controlled by 92% white male. And then that money goes all the way up to the white startups that make these tech companies. And very rarely does it make a full circle impact. So I wanted to explain that because the tech industry is what's making this wealth gap get even larger and larger at a very, very rapid rate. So I wanted to definitely give that clarification. And when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, to answer your question, no one should back away from the term of it. No one should back away from anything because diversity is just good business. The U.S. economy is made up of over 50% small businesses. And when you disrupt the access to capital to small businesses, you are in essence disrupting the whole entire U.S. economy from a macro standpoint. So DEI needs to stay and not die. and everybody needs to just stand strong.
Mahalet, I'm going to let you get in, but there's something I just...
Kelly, that she said I think is particularly important when she talked about pension funds. And what I keep saying to black folks is that we're trying to change stuff from the top of venture capitalists. No, the money's coming from down here. That's public workers. And so what needs to happen is the organization and the mobilization of public workers saying, yeah, y'all not going to take our money and just invest it. We're going to demand stuff on the front end and not wait until you already have received our money and you keep giving it to white folks.
Exactly. And to your point, I believe this is where unions come into play and why they're so important. And when you see these union strikes, when you see people being disenfranchised because they want to be in a union, they want to build a union, and they are being blocked by their employers for whatever reason, this all, is connected. It all makes sense. And when we finally understand our collective bargaining power, I think we're really going to make some substantive changes as far as what we were talking about in that clip.
Michael.
Roland, I'm glad, 2 quick points I want to make. I'm glad you brought up pension funds, because I remember back a few years ago when you hosted the State of Black America, one of the things Reverend Al Sharpton talked about is how money managers will take pension fund dollars, our pension fund dollars, and loan it to business developers. The business developers would then come into our communities and gentrify us out of our own communities with our pension fund dollars. But also, we can also choose different areas and investments that our pension fund dollars are invested into as well. A lot of us don't know that we can do that. Secondly, the person that spoke before, Ariane Simone, she talked about $5 trillion and how closing loopholes and gaps in policies, the U.S. economy can grow by $5 trillion. That was a study by Citigroup Bank a few years ago that talked about how the U.S. economy had lost $16 trillion over a 20-year period of time because of racism. And they specifically stated that about $13 trillion in business revenue never flowed into the U.S. economy because African-American entrepreneurs could not access bank loans. They talked about how black workers have lost $113 billion in potential wages over the past 2 decades because they could not get a college degree. Black people could not get a college degree. And lastly, they talked about how the housing market lost $218 billion in sales because black applicants could not get home loans. Well, Vice President Kamala Harris, when we look at policy, $50,000 tax cut for new businesses, that's something that we can take advantage of. And then also when she talks about 3 million new homes being built in her first 4 years in office, that also addresses housing and a generational wealth, having an asset to pass on to future generations as well for African Americans. So all of this is connected to policy, which is connected to who the hell you vote for. Once again, if you're black and you're thinking about voting for Donald Trump, you need to have your head examined. You don't even understand that you don't understand.
What I also want to do is I want to play for you a couple of more items here from that particular town hall, and because it was dealing with wealth creation. And I'm going to talk more about this in an expansive way on Monday, but just go ahead and give me 1 second. Let me go ahead and cue this up. Give me 1 second, y'all. I wasn't going to go to this, but what the hell? I'm going to go ahead and play it. Let's see here.
When Martin Luther King gave the speech here in Washington in the 1960s, the wealth gap between black people and white people was 8-1 in the 1960s. Today, it is more than 12-1. That's important foundation for us to think about how do we close the wealth gap? How do we think about generational wealth? We are in a moment in this country where we can rethink and reconceptualize how we grow into creating generational wealth for people of color. This is not about how much money are you making at your job. That is wages. We're talking about creating wealth. And that is about creating assets, homes, and other assets that you can pass on to your children, to people that are your descendants. And that's what we have to think about in this conversation of generational wealth. When you say from a moment of, talk about from a place of aspiration, I want us all to think about how we look at our young people and talk to them about financial literacy. Talk to them about what a balance sheet looks like. Talk to them about what interest rates are. Talk to them about the difference between the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve and why they need to care. Because the other families are talking to their kids about interest rates. They're talking to their kids about creating bank accounts. And we need to do the same thing if we want to create and close this generational gap, this wealth gap that unfortunately continues to increase. So I think that's where I would want people to focus on and start thinking about, because yes, we can pass all the laws and all the regulations that we want. And I want to thank Chairman Horsford for doing so much of this work with the Black Economic Agenda that they introduced legislation. But a lot of the work is on us. A lot of the work is making sure that we talk to our families and our friends about creating generational wealth and how we do that.
John, I want to continue the conversation that we were having in the green room, the conference room in the back, and just to fill people in. You mentioned knowing what a spreadsheet and all of that is. Did you say a spreadsheet or a financial? Whatever. Yeah. So let's talk about financial literacy. And you said that the vice president mentioned it the other night. Those aren't just words. It needs to be done. You talked about starting savings accounts for young people, especially young black people, and that we need to be financially literate. Can you fill our audience in and pick up on what we were talking about? Because I think it's really important when it comes to this conversation we're having.
Thank you, Don. Agree with you 100%. Mr. Chairman, thanks for having the vision to do this. We're sitting in a moment in history. History does not feel historic when you're sitting in it. It just feels like another day. But that does not mean the moment is not historic. This is the third Reconstruction right now. Started in 2020. First Reconstruction was after slavery. Second one was the Civil Rights Movement. Third one was 2020, kicked off with George Floyd's murder. With regard to us, it'll last to 2030 if we're lucky. This moment's not coming back again. Financial literacy is the civil rights issue of this generation. Period. Black capitalists matter. Period. This is not a new conversation, Don. After the Civil War, by the way, slavery was about money. Am I talking to myself? Slavery was about money. Free labor. Slaves were worth more than railroads and everything else in this country combined in 1860. The wealthiest city, Don, in America in 1840 was Natchez, Mississippi. In the world, rooted in slavery. 1865, Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, after the Civil War, Lincoln called for the Freedmen's Bank to create a bank charter to, quote, teach freed slaves about money. The minute he called for that, he was assassinated. The next month, it was 40 acres, a mule, a bank, assassination. 100 years later, here comes Dr. King. Civil rights, war effort. He calls for wealth, but really redistribution of wealth, murder before his first march in Washington. We're not dumb and we're not stupid. It's what we don't know that we don't know that's killing us, but we think we know. I was last night, Don, I was going to dinner with a guy who runs the Raven, Sashi Brown, and I was recommending my hotel restaurant. He said, no, let's go to Braun's, which is on 8th Street, I believe, in Northeast. It's a black-owned restaurant. So we go to this restaurant. I meet the owner. He's behind the bar. I hear his story. He bought this building in 2020 when, during the pandemic, all of the property values were down. Yes, he's making an income. He got receipts from that night. Yes, he has some revenue, but none of that matters. That building he's in is worth 7 figures. The credit score, Don, in Anacostia today is 612. The credit score in, I think it's called Tinleytown, is 775. 15 minutes apart. All across this country, you can go across this country, black people are the lowest credit score in America. That means that half of black people who have a credit score below 620, financial literacy, below 620, there's nothing wrong with us. We're brilliant. But we're talking about getting that bag, getting that cash, getting that money, getting that dollar. You build wealth in your sleep. You make money during the day. It's what I call making a living. So when you wake up in the morning, half of us are locked out of the free enterprise system because our credit score is 580, 550, 600. What do we see in our neighborhoods that have that credit score, Don? A check casher, next to a payday loan lender, next to a rent-to-own store, next to a title lender, next to a liquor store, next to a pawn shop. Can I get an amen? And a church down the street trying to make you feel a little bit better once a week. That's your neighborhood therapist. Because we are afraid to go see a psychologist, and if you black and American don't think you're crazy, you crazy. So the problem is that's a 500 credit score neighborhood. You want to change America beyond what the chairman can do, what Congress can do? We move credit scores 100 points, which we can do ourselves. You move credit scores 100 points neighborhood by neighborhood. You listen to me now. You stabilize this country. You never had a riot in a 700 credit score neighborhood in America's history. 700 credit score neighborhoods go shopping. And I don't care whether you're black or white or red or blue. When you got some more green, you got freedom. This battle has changed, and hopefully later on we get into the demographics we talked about backstage. But this financial literacy thing, this is the new battleground. Because when you know better, you do better. Last thing I'll say, where have we succeeded? For somebody cynical out there saying, I don't know about this. Where have we succeeded? The arts, professional sports, faith, public policy. Rules are published, playing field is level. Can I get an amen? No one's ever taught us capitalism and free enterprise. And hopefully before this panel is over, you're going to see this nation now literally cannot do without us. It's never been this place and this space and this time in the history of this country. We're no longer asking for charity. We're no longer asking to do the right thing. Literally, economically, the country needs us. But we have got to be prepared with the tools to be able to go in and get that access, to get the number one way you build wealth in America, which is home ownership, small business ownership, entrepreneurship, etc. In Atlanta, Mayor Andre Dickens said, I want a bank account for every kid in kindergarten. People laughed at him. What are you talking about? And Keisha Lance Bottoms. We now have an account for every kid and 7,000 kids in Atlanta public schools and kindergartens. Here's the drop the mic. Check this out. If you have a bank account in kindergarten, nothing else, no money in it, you're 50% more likely to go to college. If you have $50 in that account in kindergarten, you're 75% more likely to graduate from college. Because a kid is connecting education to aspiration. There's nothing wrong with us, except we never got the business plan, we never got the memo.
And we never got a chance. Applause for generational wealth.
So I'm gonna get more into this on Monday, Michael. But we got lots of wealth creation conversations. The problem is the conversations are all about panels. It's not actually leading to wealth creation. And I dare say, and again, I can pull up right now, it is a massive list of events, receptions, all sorts of things. I mean, a massive list of events that began Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. It's a ton of stuff tonight, tomorrow night, Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, ALC. And I'm not begrudging any of that. But I dare say, if there is a place to start when it comes to driving this, is all of those sponsors, and we're gonna show them all on Monday, all of the sponsors, all of the corporations that are here at CBCF that are sponsoring concerts and tables and receptions and awards and panels. And we've got to be asking the question of every single one of them, how much money are you spending with black law firms and professional services? Yep. Black accounting firms? Are you using black caterers? I'm not talking about this week at CBCF. I'm talking about in their companies. Do you have black limousine companies? Black event planners? How much money are you spending with black-owned media? That's the question. See, I'm not actually interested in more conversation about wealth creation. I want to actually spend time on wealth creation. And to me, if 95% of all black-owned businesses do less than $5 million in revenue, well, then to me, the CBC should say our target goal when we come back in 2025 is that we push that up to 8 or 10%. But unless you establish those goals, and unless you then begin to challenge people to actually do that, then all we're going to keep doing is having more damn conversations.
Oh, I agree, Roland. First of all, I'm glad they had the panel because they are giving out some good information. I'm glad you had my frat brother John Hope on as well. But yes, number one, the sponsors of the CBC. This is a question I have when I look at things like that, and I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who managed an African American owned business, who had various contracts, who had contracts with local city government and state government, things of this nature, but also worked alongside like corporations as well, because people talk about business ownership, but don't realize that if you don't have clients, if you don't have contracts, you really don't have a business. And we're spending billions and billions of dollars a year with these white corporations, and they're largely taking that money and giving the contracts to white-owned businesses. So the white-owned businesses, the catering companies, the advertising agencies, the law firms, largely benefit, and also media, advertising and media. Okay, I have a background in radio. Used to sell ads for the Tom Joyner Morning Show locally. I remember No Urban Dictate. You know about that, Roland. No Urban Dictate when it came to radio and media. Okay.
Well, first of all, that doesn't apply. That was with Cats V a number of years ago with radio. That question should also be asked about Apple, and I'm gonna be dealing with Apple on their absolutely lack of spending with black-owned media across the board. So again, I'm gonna be dealing with them later, but go right ahead.
Yeah. So all these corporations have to be pushed on this. And a lot of us really don't understand that. We get excited when they buy tables at our events or we see their logos and things like this. But I look at the back end. I taught my degrees in business administration. I taught entrepreneurship for 7 years. I know the money on the back end. And this is one of the things that Reverend Jesse Jackson, the Rainbow Push, was so good about when he had his nationwide economic boycott of Coca-Cola in 1981, because he was able to get tangibles from that. And people really need to go study what he did. Economic investment into black-owned banks, bottling companies, bottling distributorships, things like that for African Americans for Coca-Cola. And we're not really approaching this from the perspective of understanding the potential growth that getting a return on our investment in these white-owned corporations can have. Because we're spending money with them, just like how they're starving African-American-owned media, okay? That's unconscionable. This should be They should be targeted nationwide. Some of these corporations should be targeted nationwide for economic, for some type of economic withdrawal strategies or something like that to put pressure on them, because they're not just going to do it willingly. We saw what happened with George Floyd. After the George Floyd protests, we saw corporations donating millions and millions of dollars, and then after a period of a year, 2 years, 3 years, they start scaling it back, especially with the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have to understand that how to play this game to win, and we have to keep our foot on the gas.
So, Matt, again, the thing that I look at whenever these conversations happen, and I've seen these discussions at the National Urban League Convention, at the NAACP, and I can just keep going on and on and on. And the first thing I do is I go, what's their spend? Not the philanthropic spend. What is the corporate spend? You're a lawyer. Every single one of these companies use outside law firms. Every single one of them. And they spend millions of dollars a year on professional services fees, and very few of those dollars go to black folks. So if you're a black law firm, or you're a black accounting firm, and whatever, this is how you're able. I told somebody, I was having a conversation with the head of the SBA. I said, listen, this business has been profitable. Now, for people to understand, profitable means that you made at least more than $1 than you spent. Mm-hmm. So the problem for some folk, they hear profitable and they think, oh, you make as much money as CNN. No, that's the whole problem with some folk. So you can make $1 more than you spent, and you're in the black, you're profitable. But the reality is, we have been profitable by more than $1. But the bottom line is, those expenses have to be seriously managed, because we don't know what the economic downturn will impact us next year. So I have to actually be very, very careful with what we spend between now and December 31st, because one, got to pay taxes, and then got to be able to ensure that if there's a shortfall in advertising revenue in the first and the second quarter, you're able to still pay everybody all expenses so you don't lay people off. So I say all of that to get people to understand that if we're talking about how do we build wealth, how do we create economic opportunities, I'm going to use an example. This is very basic. I need everybody listening to what I'm talking about, because I think when we say create wealth, people start thinking Tyler Perry wealth. Now, that's a whole separate type of deal. When my TV One show ended, the sister who was doing the makeup, I was in the chair, and she says, Roland, I got to thank you. I said, why? She said, I got to thank you for hiring me to do the makeup for this show. The previous person we had to get rid of, so Sharon did the makeup. I think it was the last two and a half years of the show. She said, doing the makeup on this show allowed me to buy my first home. Now, wow. So she worked, it was 4 hours a day. I think where it may have come out to $70,000 plus $1,000 based upon hourly rate. But see, here was the key. Because she was doing the makeup on my show, a lot of the sisters who were coming through the show liked the job that she did. So when they had other things happening in D.C., including some of the entertainers, they were hiring her. So she was getting other jobs off the basis of doing the makeup on my show. In fact, she began to get other opportunities. She began to pick up other opportunities. She began to do the makeup, and she would often say, oh yeah, this person and that person and that person. And I follow her on social media. And I saw her one of her posts. And one of the posts was real interesting because she was talking about where she started and where she's been. And by doing the makeup on our show, connecting with other people, led her to do the makeup for Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. So when Ketanji Brown Jackson was in vogue, you're sitting here seeing Sharon's work. And she posted just how amazing the opportunity was. Now, Vogue did not give her credit for, no, matter of fact, they did. See, I need everybody listen and watching to understand, because see, y'all don't understand how these things are connected. What does that say right there? Drop the lower third. In this story, makeup Sharon Richmond. So, if there's no black-owned media show, Sharon is not getting the opportunity because in the television makeup industry, there are few black women doing makeup on TV shows. Some of y'all don't hear what I just said. Mm-hmm. So that's wealth creation, because by working on this show, Sharon is able to buy her first home. This is what we're talking about. So for me, when I hear these conversations, this is what happens when, if you are getting contracts, getting opportunities, you now can hire more people. So when I talk about this show, lighting, set design, control room, green screen, set, all built by black companies. So when we get more advertising, when we can hire black production crews, more producers, more writers, more staff. Those folks have jobs. What's then happening is they are sending their children to school. They are able to buy homes. That's what we're talking about in this conversation. So we need our black organizations, NAACP, National Urban League, Rainbow Push, National Action Network, fraternities and sororities, Prince Hall Mason, Eastern Star, Lynx, Jack and Jill, CBCF, CBC, CBC Institute, using their collective influence and power to say, if we're going to have wealth creation, we will start with the companies that come to us to sponsor stuff looking for that black stamp of approval, because that's how you change it. And there's no better place to start than the folk who are sitting right in front of you.
I think this is a multi-pronged thing, and I think you're 100% right. I think your example of Sharon, your former makeup person, is a brilliant example of how that can cascade and lead into other opportunities. And I think it's important for black entrepreneurs to be not only empowered, but to be well capitalized and to have as much access to capital to flourish. What I'll say, though, sometimes is when we talk about the wealth creation conversation and financial literacy, I think sometimes our focus can be a little off, where we are too focused on the capitalistic element of it, because I would dare say that the real barometer for a community and a community's financial health and a community's financial progress is the people who are primarily going to be investing and making their life off of wages, because that's the reality for most people. That's not to eschew credit rates and interest. I mean, all those things are important. If you don't know how to negotiate a better interest rate or get a better interest rate when you buy a car, then you're subject to paying more for the cost of that car over the time of the contract. We understand that. But the reality is a lot of this has to be rooted in conversations about policy. And we talk about it all the time on the show. And I know you're focused right now on the wealth creation as it relates to black entrepreneurs and black capitalism. And that's important. But at the end of the day, we really need to look at how is your average black person, what is happening in their life as it relates to policy that affects their ability to get that biggest asset, which is usually what, your house, right?
But Matt, I'm not just speaking about black entrepreneurship. Because here's the piece. The black entrepreneur piece, I hire people. So what I'm talking about leads to hiring. So same thing with you. How many people in your law firm?
Well, about 20 some odd, 6 lawyers and 15 support staff.
All right. So if you get additional clients, you have the ability to grow. If you have the ability to get professional services contracts with corporations in the corporate law space, you now have the ability to be able to hire more people, hire more staff, provide scholarships or whatever. And so that's what I mean. So the wealth building conversation is not solely about the entrepreneur. It's also for that individual. It's for the brother. It's for the brother or sister coming out of prison. So I think what happens sometimes is we think that's only about the person who owns it. That's why I use Sharon as the example. No, this was the example of the person who didn't own it, but who was a beneficiary of being hired to do something and now is able to build something even on her own.
Sure, and you're not wrong. We actually agree 100%. So I agree with you. I'm saying what I have seen, what I've experienced is sometimes when we talk about Black wealth building, it's too often in the context of how a person who in an entrepreneurial context can get assets to do exactly that. And I think that's important. I think Sharon is a perfect example of exactly why Black entrepreneurs and Black businesses are not only important, but need to be capitalized better and need to get a much larger share of the pot. But in addition to that, what I'm saying is when we talk about Black wealth building, we have to start at the common denominator, which is not necessarily entrepreneurs. It's the people who work in a government job for 25, 30 years, right? And how do we ensure through policy, through institutional support, through the organizations that you mentioned and otherwise, how do we make sure that you can live a fruitful and successful life as a Black American where you can invest, you can own your home, you can have financial security, you can have a trade or a business, a small business if you want, or you can go to college. I mean, there's so many things that dovetail, and I don't mean to imply that this is an easy answer. But the reason I think that conversation is important because that's the vast majority of our brothers and sisters. Yeah. It's not people with necessarily the highest earning potential and who have the opportunity to take disposable income and buy a real estate, an investment property. It's more, how do I make sure if I don't necessarily have some of those opportunities that I can send my children to a good school, I can get them educated, I can make sure they've got a little money to go out into the world. And that's the conversation I don't think we have robustly enough when it comes to wealth building, so to speak, because that's the reality for more people. And I think the real question is, how do you make sure that the government support and the government programs, like we're talking about Vice President Harris, support that? Because that's the reality of most of our brothers and sisters, and that's what we need to look at.
And I'll give you this. I'm going to close it out with this here. So, John Hope Brown, he praised Deion Sanders for getting with the bank and opening accounts for his players who have children, who have babies. When John's comments, he talked about the likelihood of a kid who has $50 in a bank account in kindergarten, the likelihood of them going on to college and actually graduating, because now they're learning that. I mean, I remember when we had little savings and loan accounts, and me, my brother, and my sister, we all had our little accounts and had $20, $30 in it, whatever. And so it was changing sort of your view in terms of what you were focused on. But the thing that I want to talk about here is that, again, close with, is that when we're talking about on the granular level. I remember when I was at TV One, we had it was Thanksgiving or Christmas, I forgot. So they had potluck, whatever the hell it was. So we're sitting in the conference room eating. And we were just talking, and I brought up the fact that when I was in Chicago a few weeks earlier, we were just taping something at Rainbow Push, and John Rogers just sort of casually, Judge Greg Mathis was asking him about mutual funds. He was talking about how his money was in Merrill Lynch, and we all thought that John Rogers and Ariel dealt with institutional investors. We didn't realize they actually had their own their mutual funds were just regular, ordinary folk. And then John goes, "Oh yeah, they have those. You know, people can start with as little as $50 a month." We all like, any of y'all know that? Everybody was like, "We know that." We were like, "John, y'all might want to tell that story." So what happened was, here we are at the staff luncheon, and I mentioned that, and two of the folks at the table, literally after lunch, went back to their office and opened an Ariel Capital mutual fund starting at $50 a month. And it was one of those basic small things that got them on the road of putting money away in the mutual fund and then being able to grow that and go from there. And that's what we're talking about here. That's information. And so what I desire is from our organizations is to use their leverage and influence to be able to drive these corporations to begin to create the downflow of dollars. I don't want them just buying a table. I want them leaving here and having the downflow of dollars to our corporations, to black companies, which this allows us to hire more people, be able to provide the level of education, because that's actually how you create wealth. Everybody's not going to own a company, but if we are hiring more people, being able to grow, then we can actually impact. So I'm going to have more of this on Monday. Mike, we appreciate it. Matt, thanks a lot. Kelly had to go, folks. Thank you so very much, folks.
For everything. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register for the online history classes that I teach. We deal with thousands of years of history. I teach 2 online history classes, Saturdays 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. and Sundays 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Saturdays is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And then on Sundays, Black resistance movements, from Christopher Columbus to the Haitian Revolution and the Black Power movement, 1492 to 1968. So we have classes coming up this weekend. Classes on sale, $80. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it any time. We have a bundle pack of courses. You can register for both classes also. I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips. Even after the course is over with, you still have access to the full class. You can go back and watch it anytime. And then Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding transatlantic slave trade. That meets this weekend also. You can we have the course outline here that you can download as well. So it gives you a lesson plan for each class session. There's about 100 articles that we reference. The first class is about 200 slides, 15 books that we reference. You don't have to buy any of the books to follow along in class. Click right here to download the lesson plan also, okay? I show you it's a very visual class, so I show you the excerpts of the books right on the screen, all right? Okay, so the content is PG-13. You can use this with your children as well. I don't do a lot of cursing. It's not overly vulgar or anything like that.